Hi, I'm Lisa Comfort from Sew Over It, and I'm going to show you how to insert a regular zip into a closed seam. I'm going to put it into this piece of fabric here, but this technique can be used for cushions, bags, and also skirts. Make sure that the top of the zip is lined up in the right way according to the seam allowance that you're using. So if it's one of our patterns, say the Intro to Dressmaking full circle pattern, it needs to be 1.5 centimeters from the top. Just in front of the metal bit here, what I'm going to do is put a little snip just in front through both the fabric and also the zip tape. Then we're going to put the zip to one side and we are going to stitch the seam closed, ready for the zip. So we're going to start with a long stitch all the way down, and when we get to our snip, we're going to change back to a normal stitch length and we're going to do our back stitching as we would at the beginning of a seam, all the way to the end, and then our back stitching again. You can see the long stitch here. Then at this point, level with the notch, we've changed to the regular stitch length and gone and done our reverse, and then regular stitch length and done the reverse at the end. Okay, so this is my pressed open seam, and now I'm going to take the zip and place it face down onto the back of the seam. I've got my little snip here to help me line up with where my stitch length changes, and then just making sure that it's sitting centrally along the seam, and if there is any bit of fabric poking out from the seam allowance, that it's the same on both sides. Then we're going to flip it over and we're going to pin on one side with the pins going upwards, and on the other side they're going to be going downwards. And that's all because of the direction of the sewing. So we're going to be sewing down on one side and then coming across and sewing back up on the other side. And you want your pins to be nice and easy to whip out as you're sewing. So if the head is facing you, then you can just pull that out as you go. The bottom pin that's marking where the notch is, we need to still have that in the fabric, but we want to be able to take it out easily when we're sewing. So we're going to take it out, can see where the pin was, and pop it back in again so that we can easily take that out when we get to it. And then the remaining pins on the back, we need to take those out as well. Now we're going to sew that on. So we're going to put the zip foot on the machine, and I'm going to start sewing from the top left hand side. So I'm going to make sure that I put this on with the right hand side of the presser foot open so that I can get nice and close to the zip. The widest part of the zip is the chunky slider bit, so that determines the width of the sewing, because if you start sewing too narrow at the beginning, you'll then have to come out and you'll get a sort of bulk bit there and you won't have a nice straight line. So what I recommend doing is tucking it under when you're level with the chunky slider, and then at that point just slide it back, try not to remove so that you keep the position, and then that's the width that I'm going to sew the zip in. Now there isn't anything for you to follow as a guideline. If you want to, you can actually draw a line on, but I think it's better just to try and sew as straight as you can, visualizing something. So I visualize the straight part of this seam and the flat edge there, and I'm looking at that distance and trying to keep that distance the same. The fabric on top can stretch, but the zip tape can't. So if you try and reduce that, if you try and stretch it out and hold it as best tight as you can, that will keep it as flat as possible. But if you do get a little ripple, just allow it to come through and follow the way down. So don't stitch in a pleat, just allow the ripple to come down. So I'm coming to my horizontal pin that marks where the stitch length changes. So I'm going to take that out, but I can still see where it was, and it's important to still see where it was. And at that point, we're going to stop. We're going to put the needle in by turning the hand wheel towards us, and then lifting up the presser foot and pivoting round, and then lower the presser foot back down. We're now going to stitch over and across the zip, and it will go over it, but you might need to give it a little pull from behind or a little push, and then you want to stop in the same place on the other side. So I'm going to pull that pin out, lift up, and then you start stitching up the other side. And then at the top, you're just reversing in the normal way. Okay, so then take a stitch unpicker and you just insert it into the seam, and making sure you are catching the stitches and not the fabric. You can then go wee all the way up and unpick all of it. It's very satisfying, and like magic the zip appears, and you can take all these little bits out, and there you have a neatly inserted regular zip where both edges are perfectly meeting in the middle.